Welcome. Well, I guess welcome myself back. It's great to be back. And all right. Oh. Yeah, we're going to begin from the start of Perek Zayin tonight. Okay, so we are up to our last Aramaic Perek. Next week, hopefully back to Hebrew. And I mentioned this a little bit last time in Perek. Well, there's really two main topics tonight. One is it's a dream that Daniel has, and about the Daled Malchuyos, which we already saw. Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, which Daniel interpreted was about the four kingdoms. Now Daniel has his own dream of that. So that's one thing. And then the other big topic that comes up here is some kind of allusion to possibly when Mashiach is coming, as that plays into the Daled Malchuyos. The first time Nebuchadnezzar has the dream, he has a dream about the four different kingdoms, and then there's this big stone, right? The big stone comes out of the sky and smashes the statue, and then we say that stone represents Mashiach. But that's really all we have. So tonight we have a little bit more information, and we'll hopefully spend some time going over some of the attempts of the Mefarshim over the years to try to pin down when they believed Mashiach was coming and what that's based off of. So hopefully at the end of here, you can walk out at least understanding where that comes from. People know it's somewhere in Daniel, but you'll understand where it comes from, what it's based on, and how they arrived at the numbers they arrived at. And we're going to see it again next week, and also in Perek Yud Beis. It's 3 times. It's once in our Perek, once Perek Ches, and then the last Perek. So without any further explanation, here we go with Perek Zayin. So Perek Zayin, Pasuk Aleph. Bishnas Chada, LeBelshazzar, Melech Bavel. So this is in the first year of Belshazzar. Daniel Chelam Chazah, Daniel had a dream. So this is again going out of order. We already had earlier in Perek Hey, when Belshazzar had the writing on the wall, the hand came down, the writing on the wall, Daniel came in and said what the writing on the wall was. That was in the third year of Belshazzar, and then Belshazzar died that night. So now we're going back. This is actually before the writing on the wall event. And Daniel has this dream. He sees something while he's lying down. And he writes down the basic gist of the dream. So what is the dream? So what we're going to do is like this. I just want to read the psukim of what the dream is so we get down the facts, and then we can look at the chart I made and go through what perhaps each of the symbolisms of them are. So pasuk beis. Ane Daniel va'amar chazeh haves bechazvi im lelia. I saw this vision at night. Va'aru Arba Ruche Shemaya, the 4 winds of heaven, Megichan Liyama Rabba, were like tossing up the great seas. And what happens? Va'arba Chevan Rav Rivan, and there are these 4 great beasts, Salkan Minyama, that come up from the sea, Shan Yanda Minda, and each beast is different, one from the next. So let's read what each of the 4 beasts are, and then we'll go back and talk about some symbolism. Pasuk Daled, Pasuk 4. Kadmaisa ke'aryeh. The first beast looks like a lion. Vigapin di nishar la. And it has some kind of wings on it. We'll talk about what those wings are in a moment. Chazeh haves adimiritu gapa. I was watching, and the wings that this lion has start being plucked off of it. Unetilas min ara. And the lion is lifted off of the ground. Va'al raglayan ke'enash hakimas, and then it was put down on the ground with like the feet of a person. Ulavav and standing was more accurate. Yeah, it was stood on the ground like a person stands. Ulavav enash, and the heart of a human, Yehivla, was given to this lion winged creature. Okay, so right, so this by the way, this is very similar to the mythological creature of the griffin, right? Except that the griffin, I think, is a lion. It's a lion's body with eagle's wings, but I think it's something different about the feet. There's something. It's slightly different than a griffin, but it's pretty close. Svi's gonna look it up while we go on to hay. What did you say? Yeah, what's the deal with the heart? Inside, you can't see it. Right. Okay, good. So we're gonna come back to that in a second. Let's take a look at pasuk hay. What does the griffin have? Let's hear it. Got the eagle face, right? A lion's body, right? Yeah, okay. It's got a lion's body, eagle head, and eagle wings, and this presumably had like the full form of a lion, just with the wings. Okay, pasuk hey. Va'aru cheva achari tinyana. Now there's a second beast. Dam yaladov. It looks like a bear. Ulastar chad hakimas, and it's like off. It's hard to translate exactly what that means. It means like it like stood off to one side. Utela il in bepuma ben shinaya. And this bear has 3 ribs in its mouth, in its teeth. And they, whoever they is, someone was saying to the bear, Kumi, get up, and eat lots of meat. We have the lion with big wings being lifted off the ground, a bear with 3 ribs in its mouth, and a hungry bear that's eating a lot of meat, or is told to eat. Number 3. Basar dana after that, Chazeh Haves, I saw Achari Kinamar. There was another beast, looked like a leopard. And it had these big, everyone can make sure they are muted. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay. It had and it had 4 heads, this leopard. V'la gapin arba diof al gaba. It had 4 wings like a bird and 4 heads. So 4-headed and 4-winged leopard. Okay. Pasuk Zayin. Basar dina, after this, there was a 4th beast. It was extraordinarily frightening and powerful and scary. And it had iron teeth, Rav Ravan, that were very great. It was eating umadka and grinding up. And everything else that was around was trampling with its feet. And it was different. It was different than any other type of that there was. Okay. I can't. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Middle of Pasuk Zion. This 4th beast was different than any other beast that was before it. The Karnayan Asarla, and it had 10 horns. Okay, so a 10-horned, not really described, some kind of crazy, terribly frightening beast. Ches. Mistakal habes bekarnai. I was looking at the horns. Va'alu karen achari ze'era. There was a very small horn, silkas beinehen, that was popping up amongst the other 10. Utlas min karnaya kadmayasa is akara min kadama, and it actually knocked away 3 of the other horns. Va'alu einin ka'aine anasha bekarnada, and this horn had some kind of eyes, like the eyes of a person. Upum mimalil rav ravan. And it had a mouth that was speaking and saying lots of great things. Okay. Pasuk test. Yeah, a lot. It was saying lots of things. Doesn't say what it was saying. Okay. Pasuk test. Then I saw a dikarsavan remiv. I saw that there were chairs set up. Va'atik yomin yisiv. Now, what is the atik yomin? Atik yomin is often translated as the ancient of days, right? The old person, okay? The old one is sitting. Levushe kitilag chivar. His clothing is white like snow. Sa'are she kamar nekeh. And his hair is white like wool. Karsiye shavivin dinor. His throne is like, has like fire underneath it. Galgilohi nur dalik. And there's like, like wheels of fire. Now, this is obviously some kind of, physical description of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Malbim says, interesting, he says, Atik Yomin, Atik can mean old. The Malbim here says, Atik also can sometimes mean to be removed. So Atik Yomin would be describing Hashem, not as old, but Atik Yomin. He saw what? I saw the one who was removed from Yom, the one who is removed from time, meaning God, who is outside of time. That's how he understands it, okay? So he sees, again, whatever that means, some understanding of Hashem. I mean, I think, no, so in Tanakh, right, I'm trying to think where you have the word matik, means to like, I'm trying to think if it's Hebrew. He doesn't say, it's in Pasuk Tes, he does not say. He just says, he is netak min hayamim v'hazman. I just assumed that netak meant to be removed from. I don't know why I'm assuming that from somewhere. I think. Okay, it could be. Fine. Okay. Okay.
Maybe this one. I mean, this is more Hebrew, but maybe it's related. Vayatek misham tahara.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, vayatek misham tahara. Yeah, good. He removed it. Yeah. Okay. Pasuk Yud. Nahar dinor naged v'nafek min kadamoi. There was like a river of fire coming out from Hashem. Elef alfin yisham shunei. There were thousands of things serving him. Vribo rivan kadamoi yukumun, and tens of thousands of things in front of him. Dina yisiv v'sifran pasichu. Okay, so he sees now Hashem, and there are these. He's on his throne, and there are these big books which are open. Pasuk Yud Aleph. We're going to go to Tesvav, and then we'll explain. I then saw perceived the words that this horn, this little horn, was saying all these things. And I watched until this fourth beast was killed. V'huvad gishma, it was removed. V'hivas likedas esha, and it was thrown into a fire. Ushar chebasa, and all of the other beasts, hediv shaltanhon, their authority was diminished. V'archa b'chayin yihivas lahon, but they were allowed to stay chayin, alive, and they were granted some existence, ad zman v'idan, until some undescribed time. Pasuk Yud Gimel, chazeh haveis b'chez v'leilya v'aru im anane shemaya. And I then see from the clouds of heaven. What happens to the clouds? Kibar enosh aseh hava. There is something that looks like a human that is coming. Va'ad atik yomaya mita. And this human comes from the clouds, and it goes over to the atik yomin, goes over to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ukdamohi hakruvuhi, and presents himself in front of him. V'lei yehiv shaltan. And to this human, authority was given. V'yakar umalchu. And majesty and kingship was given to this human, to this human. V'chol ha'memaya umaya v'lishanaya, and all of the nations and the countries and different things, le yifluchun, they all worship this human. Shaltanei shaltan olam, his authority was eternal. Dila yadei was not removed. Umalchusei dila sischabal, and his kingship was never destroyed. Okay. So looking over at this, at our sheet here, lots of different explanations as to what the symbolism could be. I just tried to pull from a few. Anyone wants to offer any other suggestions, I'm open to that. But we'll start out with Bavel, okay? So Bavel is the lion. That's understood by Chazal as Bavel. And you have the lion with the vulture wings. The wings are plucked and stood like a human. So what is the concept of a lion? So obviously, most people think of a lion, they think of, power, force, right, the king of the jungle. So the lion represents, great power, which was Bavel. Nebuchadnezzar had this great kingdom. It's interesting, I put on the sheet under the symbolism, lions in the palace. In the 1900s, they excavated in Bavel what they believed to be Nebuchadnezzar's palace. And I actually have a book of it at home with pictures of it. They have, and they have these lions like on the wall of the palace. Like not, I'm saying like engraved on the wall. So
the palace also the gates, because they definitely.
Oh, the Ishtar Gate, maybe.
The gates of the city.
That could be the book that it said it was found in the palace. I'm not I'm an expert in that, but that's what it said. They had pictures of it there, so it's kind of cool. So they're saying that Nebuchadnezzar himself even saw him. I mean, they associated themselves with their great power and force with the king of the world, the king of the jungle, the king of the world. Okay. The second thing is the the wings of the nesher. What is a nesher? So if you notice, I wrote vulture here. There's a famous thing, right? It says Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim on the wings of eagles, on the wings of Nesharim, and He's going to bring us to Eretz Yisrael in times of Mashiach al Kanfei Nesharim. So there's a famous Tosfos because the Gemara talks about the kashrus of different birds, and it says that a nesher is the prototype not kosher bird. And Tosfos there actually says in Masachas Chulin, he says that people think an nesher is an eagle, Aleph Yud Yud Gimel Lamed, he says eagle. He says, but it's not an eagle. And he says that he describes it, and he basically says that a nesher is a vulture. Now, there are some Rishonim who do say that's an eagle. I think the Rashbam says it's an eagle, but most Rishonim seem to say that a nesher is actually a vulture. I do not remember, but I don't think it says an eagle. Okay. What is the idea of that? That the vulture's wings. So the idea is that it's like flying, right? It's like vast. It's like a swift conquer of everything. The vulture, as it is described in Tanakh, right? Hashem's going to take us out of Mitzrayim. It says Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim al kanfei nesharim. And how is the nesher described? What does Rashi say? Famous Rashi. He says the nesher flies higher than every other bird, right? It's not afraid of any other bird underneath it. It's only afraid because it flies higher than it's not afraid of any other bird flying down to get it. It flies higher than any other bird. So the nesher for birds is like what the lion is to land animals, right? So it's the lion body and it's the nesher wings. Okay, what happens? Number 3, the wings are plucked. This presumably denotes the concept of like the removal of power, that Bavel's power is going to be diminished, and then stood like a human and the human heart. So some of Farshim say this means that the lion turns into a human, means it's a way of describing the lion becoming more weak, right? So Bavel is another description of Bavel becoming weak. It becomes more human-like instead of, beast-like, like a lion.
Now, I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
That obviously, like, it kind of sounds like obvious that Daniel is not chronological order.
Correct.
It would seem hard to imagine that after like he already prophesied and Belshazzar was killed, now he's getting a nevuah about Babel.
Good. So we
manages
good.
Taking place early.
Yeah. So if you look, so the first, thank you. So Ari's point, yes. So the first pasuk says that it happens in the first year of Belshazzar. So Babel is still going at this point. That's correct. Okay. Number 2 is the bear. Is Parasumadai, the bear. So what is the concept of the bear being Parasumadai? So I don't really know what to say about this. I can repeat what the Gemara says. I can't say I understand it fully, but the Gemara says that let's start with what the bear represents. The bear seems to represent an animal which represents pure and total physical indulgence. Okay, in terms of what it eats, in terms of its physical body mass. And the Gemara says that the Persians, that is like the epitome of the Persians, right? It talks about the Sudas Achashverosh was like the epitome of like indulgence and physicality and food, and it associates that with the bear. What is the idea that the bear stood to one side? So we know that Persia eventually becomes, shares, so to speak, the Malchus is shared with Paras Umadai, right? First, Madai becomes the king, and after Madai, then there is Persia. So Persia, so to speak, waits off to the side. It stood to one side. Persia waited 1 year for Madai to be the king, and then Persia comes and takes in. What are the 3 ribs in its mouth? So there's a few different pshatim. The one that makes the most sense to me is we have 3 Persian kings, right? First, we're going to have Koresh, who allows Bnei Israel to rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash. After that, Achashverosh, and then after that, Dar Yavish. So 3 ribs, 3 Persian kings. And the eat lots of meat, again, presumably is expressing this concept that the Persians were completely engrossed and indulged in physicality. Yeah.
Darius II, so evidently there's a first. So how's that?
I think he might have been Madai.
Yes. So Tzvi's asking, where's Darius the first? So Darius the first is Daryavesh HaMadai. So he's Madai, which he was last parak. He was the one who, with Daniel in the lion's den, right? So it said Daryavesh, king of Madai, and he was the son-in-law, I think the son-in-law or father-in-law of the Melech Koresh of Paras. So he's the first king, he's Madai, he finishes, and then Persia takes over. Number 3 is the leopard, which is supposed to denote Greece. So there's a few possibilities for this. Rashi brings something, I left it blank. Rashi says something interesting. Rashi says the leopard, obviously when you think of a leopard, the spots. So Chazal do try to explain something with the spots. It says, just like they tried to, Yavan tried to blot out different areas and snippets of Klal Yisrael in terms of the gezeros they did. No bris milah, no Rosh Chodesh, no Shabbos. So picking certain things to try to target to blot out Klal Yisrael. That's the leopard in the spots. Other Mefarshim say that the leopard also indicates some kind of swift conquer, right? Leopard is very fast and quick, so and clever. So that represents Alexander the Great in Greece and the swift conquer of the world. His conquest. Right. So that lines up with that. The four wings on his back. So some people say that this represents, again, the four corners of the earth. His conquest was very rapid and very expansive. And then the four heads is after Alexander the Great died, his kingdom was divided up among the four generals.
The problem is, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, it was broken up into 3 generals, not 4.
Yeah, but one was his brother, right? It was 3 generals and his brother. His kingdom was broken up into 4, right? It was Ptolemy, Seleucid.
Was just 3. I thought it was Antigonus, Seleucid with a Ptolemy.
Okay, so I have
and whatever.
So yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong.
I thought, hold on one second. Ari's question is, wasn't Alexander's kingdom only broken up into 3 and not 4? I thought I saw somewhere that it was 4. Give me one second here. Okay, I'll have to look into that. Point taken, I'll have to look into that. And number 4 is Edom, is Edom, right, is Rome. The beast is not described. Its iron teeth are devouring. I didn't really see any pshatim as to what exactly that means.
Why there's no beast? Is it because it's a different creature you've never seen? Like it says like nothing different than.
Correct. It's different than all the others.
So it doesn't have a name. It looks like some. It can't describe it because it doesn't have in his vocabulary, in his, you know.
Yeah. So the Malbim says that basically that unlike the other kingdoms, which all put a big stress on avodah zarah and polytheism, so Edom was different and unique in the sense it was different than anything that came before it, right? It was the first one that was, I mean, that gets into the whole question whether Christianity is avodah zarah or not, but it didn't follow the typical avodah zarah path of the others. That's what the Malbim says.
Well, I mean, in the beginning it was.
It's true in the beginning, but I guess once it took, yeah. Tzvi, what do you have for us? That's one. Right? Who's it? Ptolemy, Seleucid, Philip, and forgot the 4th one. Okay, tell me. Okay, fine. Okay, fair enough. All right. What are the 10 horns? So we're going to see this soon. The pasuk itself is going to say that the 10 horns are the 10 emperors or kings from Rome. And what is the small horn? The small horn with the eyes and the mouth. This is Titus, right? The famous medrash, the Gemara, that says that he went into the Kodesh Kodashim, right? And he stabbed the Paroches, and blood came out, and he looked up to Hashem, right? And he said to Hashem, like, I'm, go again. So that is the mouth, which is speaking great things against God, right? That is Titus, who came into the second base of Midrash. Okay, fine. It starts from Caesar all the way to the last one is Vespasian. The last one is Vespasian, and I wish I could name the 8 in between, but I can't.
A lot more after.
Yeah, it goes up to the destruction of the second, up to Vespasian, and then Titus with the destruction of the Baishani. Okay, fine. All right, so that's that. Now, the rest of the parak, essentially, the next few psukim is Daniel asking. It says that he sees in Shemaim, he sees there's this malach, and he asks the malach, what's going on with this fourth kingdom, right? What is this? This is one he seems to have trouble with, and he asks for a description of that. And the malach basically says what essentially we said, that there's going to be this kingdom that's going to be terrible, and it's going to come along, it's going to be very bad for the Jews, and it's going, and eventually what's going to happen is the kingship is going to be taken, the authority is going to be taken from this kingdom and granted to the Jews. So I want to skip for a moment to pasuk Chaf Gimel and read 3 psukim, and then we're going to deal with the Mashiach issue. So pasuk Chaf Gimel, pasuk 23. We skipped like 7 or 8 psukim in between. Pasuk Chaf Gimel. So it says, Kain Amar. This is what the Malach says. Chayvsa Revi Isa, the 4th kingdom. Malchu Revi Tevi Va'ara. There's going to be a kingdom on land. Disishneim in Kol Malkavas, that's different than everything else. V'seichel Kol Ara, it's going to consume all the land. Usdushina V'sadkina, and crush it and grind it up. Pasuk Chav Daled. V'karnaya Asar Mina Malchusa. Asra Malkin Yukumun. And what are the 10 horns? They are 10 kings that are going to come from it. V'achran, and after that, Yukum Achrehon, V'hu Yishnemen Kad Maya, Utvas Malkin Yahashbil. Something is going to get up, which is Titus. Again, the history here is a little bit beyond me, but he's going to get up and knock out a preceding 3 kings. And Pasuk Chafei, here we go. Umilin letzad ila'a yemalil. And he will speak things up towards the one above. Ulekadishe elyonin yevale. And he will try to devour the holy ones. V'yisbar lahashnaya zimnin v'das. And he's going to try to change their zimnin, means like their times, their calendars, I guess, v'das, and their laws, their religion. V'yisyahavun bidei, and they will be given into his hands. Here's the key words. Until when? Ad, idan, a time, v'idanin, and times, uplag idan, and half a time. So the Malach tells Daniel essentially that this 4th beast is going to come. It's going to be powerful and terrible. And what's it going to do? It's going to rule over these Kadishe Elyonin, which we assume is the Jewish people. And it's going to rule over them until when? Until a time and times and half a time. And after this point, then what's going to happen was that there's going to be this man who comes from the clouds, and that's going to be Mashiach, basically. Yes.
But it's already being, I mean, they're not going to come. Bubbles they already are conquered by bubbles.
They're already conquered by Bubble.
Strange, but it's saying these 4 things are going to come.
These 4 things are going to come, but meaning
already here. Right, like, you know.
Correct. Right. No. Yeah, I'm saying that's true. The Bubble one they're already amidst, meaning the 4th one that comes, that's going to be the end of the game, and that's going to run until a time and times and half a time. Okay. So it is based off of this pasuk that all the Mefarshim basically say this is the pasuk that's telling us there's going to be 4 Malchuyos, and number 4 is going to last. Unlike in the Nevuah of Nebuchadnezzar in his dream, we didn't have an end time. Here we're given an end time. It goes until a time and times and half a time. And if we can just know what a time and times and half a time is, then we know then we know that's when Mashiach will be here. Okay, so let's take a look. Before we do this, we should just read one Gemara. So the Gemara on the sheet here, number 1, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, a famous Gemara. The Gemara says, Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Yonasan. Shmuel Nachmani said, Tipach atzman shel machashve kitzin. Those people who try to figure out the end of time, they should, be pained in agony. Shahayu omrim, because they are saying, Kevan shehigia esaketz. People will say, you great rabbi told me when Mashiach was going to come, and now Mashiach didn't come, v'lo ba, shuv eino ba. That's it. It's never going to happen. I give up. Ella, rather, chakelo. Rather, stop with figuring out the times and just wait for Mashiach. Shenemar, as it says, ... Okay, this is another Gemara. The Gemara in Megillah says that Yonasan in number 2, Yonasan ben Uziel, was one of the people, it says, who translated Navi into Aramaic. And it says that when he did this, a Baskol came out from Shemaim and said, why are you doing this? And he said, I didn't do it to try to get a lot of honor and fame. I did it so that people shouldn't misunderstand Navi and people should understand what they're talking about. Shelo yirbu machlokes b'Yisrael. And then it says, he was going to translate Kesuvim, which Sefer Daniel is in Kesuvim, he was going to translate that. And the Baskol came out and said, stop, don't do it. Why did the Baskol say that? Because in Sefer Kesuvim in Kesuvim we have Sefer Daniel, which tells us when Mashiach is going to come. And if he were to expound it and translate and explain it, people would find that out, and we didn't want people to know that. So based off of these Gemaras, it sounds like the Gemara frowns very much upon trying to give explanations or try to figure out the time. So let's just take it at, we know it's a time and times and half a time, and we don't know what that means. We'll leave it at that. And yet, here we have, you'll turn it over in a minute, we'll see, we have Rashi, Rav Sadigon, the Rambam, the Ramban, all these great Rishonim, Abarbanel, giving projected times for Mashiach. So what's going on? So the Ramban says 2 answers. The Ramban says, Chazal never meant that it's usher to do so. Chazal frowned upon doing it. Why did they frown upon doing it? Because people were going to give up hope. And he says, the alternative is, though, in certain generations, if we don't give people something to look forward to, they also will give up hope. So he says, the whole reason why they didn't want you to calculate it's still occurring. People are giving up hope, and they're saying it's never going to happen. So if Talmidei Chacham can come up with ways to explain the psukim and explain it and understand it for people, at least that will give people hope. His other answer the Ramban gives, in what he writes, it's a Sefer called the Sefer HaGeula, where he talks about a lot of this. So the Ramban says, is Chazal only meant that right after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. When they knew that Mashiach was so far off in the future, he said, don't try to figure it out based off of the Psukim. Because you're going to tell people it's not coming for another 1,500 years. They're going to say, oy, vey, nebuch, done. And that's it, right? But the Ramban says, the closer we get to it, now, if Chazal were around now, the Balei Gemara, they would say, yeah, for sure, you should do it because it's getting closer. They only didn't want you to do it because we were so far away. Okay, fine. So let's take a look at some of the explanations where it comes from. It's on the back, on page 2. So we'll go through each one just so we understand. It's all based off of this pasuk, right? It says, Bnei Yisrael are going to be under the authority of this fourth kingdom for a time and times and half a time. So all we really need to do is figure out is, what is this time? So there are 4 different opinions that I brought here. I'm sure there's more. These are 4 famous ones. The 4 different opinions all kind of are working off of the same assumption. Let's take one at a time, very slowly. I'll take any questions. Try not to, let's just work on one at a time so we're not jumping. Okay, let's start with Rav Saad Yagon. And Rashi quotes this, okay? So just to give you an idea, Rav Saad Yagon lived in, you see, the early 900s. Okay? So he says like this. He says, what is this time? So he says like this. Skip over for a moment. He says, the time, to my second box, the middle box, he says, the time, it means like this. There will be a time period under which we will be under the authority of Rome, Christianity. What is that time period? It is equal to 2 times and half a time. As opposed to other people in a moment, we're going to see us take this phrase to mean 1 time plus another time plus another time plus a half a time. He says, no, there is a time period. What is the time? The time equals 2 times and a half. So what are these 2 times? So Rav Yagon says they must be 2 distinct times in the history of the Jewish people. So one of them, he says, is the time from the Bris Bein HaBesarim until we got into Eretz Yisrael. From the time Hashem told Avram Avinu, you're going to go into Galus, until the time that we finally arrived in Eretz Yisrael, and Galus was over. That was a distinct time period in our history as a people, going back to Avram. So how long is that? So Hashem tells Avram, the Bris Bein HaBesarim, he says, you're going to be strangers in a foreign land for 400 years. Then we get out of Mitzrayim, and how long are we in the desert for? We're in the desert for 40 years, right? I mean, it ends up being, meaning they weren't in Mitzrayim for actually 400 years, but Hashem initially says 400 years. So he initially says 400 years from the Bris Bein HaBesarim until they get out of Mitzrayim, and then 40 years in the desert. That equals 440. That's time period number 1. 440, okay? Give me a second. Yes, correct. Okay. No, hold on a minute. I may have gotten it wrong. That is going to be 440 years. Hold on. I'm off here for a second. I apologize. Sorry. I apologize. He says it differently. Let me go back for a second. He says like this. Scratch that. I'm sorry. He says, from the time the Jews went out of Mitzrayim until they built the Beis HaMikdash. Sorry. From the time they went out of Mitzrayim until they had a Beis HaMikdash, how long was that? So that was a period of 480 years. It says that when they built the Beis HaMikdash, it says Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash 480 years after they came out of Mitzrayim. So that's one time period. Leaving Mitzrayim until the building of the Beis HaMikdash, that is 480 years. How long did the Beis HaMikdash stand for? 410 years. So that's another time period. So one is 480. Leaving Mitzrayim until the Beis HaMikdash is 480. The time that the Beis HaMikdash stood is 410. 410 plus 480 is 890. So these are our 2 times. Our 2 times are 480 plus 410. These are our 2 times. And half a time. What is half of 890? Half of 890 is 445, right? 445 times 2 equals 890. So we have 890 is the 2 times, sum total of 2 times, and half a time is 445, which equals 1,335 years. From when? From the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. Now the truth is, Rome was really in power before the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash, but they count it from that time because that's when we lost our autonomy, I guess, right? So Rome was Right. Meaning I'm saying before we had a base of Mikdash, but Rome was still a world power. During second base of Mikdash, they were still a world power, but we lost ours, so to speak, in the year 68. They're calling it, he says 68 is when the base of Mikdash was destroyed. So if you go from, okay, so yeah, that's a question of 68, 69, 70. They're all going with the year 68, so we'll take that. So if you go from the year 68 and you take 1335 onto 68, brings you to what year? Simple math, the English year 1403. And Rav Saadia Gaon is writing this in the 900s. So he says in 500 years, Mashiach will be here in 1403. Okay, that was his conclusion. Now, go down for one moment now to the Ramban. Okay, the Ramban lived 300 years after Rav Saadia Gaon in the early 1200s. Okay, now the Ramban, if you look at the end, the Ramban ends up with the same 1403. He ends up with the same year, but with a different calculation. How does he get his calculation? So the Ramban says something very simple. The Ramban says, what is the amount of time that we're looking at? We're looking at the amount of time from when the Jews, starting from, this is what I was saying before about 440, from the Bris Bein HaBasarim all the way until we get into Eretz Yisrael, which is a total of 440 years. From the Bris Bein HaBasarim all the way to going into Eretz Yisrael, that's 440 years. Now, the Ramban says, that's our time. Now, what does the pasuk say? Rome will rule for how long? A time, and times, which is 1 time times 2, and a half a time. So the Ramban says, take the time, this 440 years, and that's 1 time, plus 440, plus 440. Correct, the second time it says it plural. So it's basically, the Ramban says it's 440 times 3.5, right? A time, 440, times 440 and 440, right? That's 440 times 3, and a half a time. What does that equal? So if you do 440 times 3.5, that equals 1540. 1,540 years. From when? 1,540 years from not the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, but from when Rome began to rule, when Rome got the rulership from Greece, which he shows you the cheshbon there. And he says, if you take 1540 from that time and you go forward in time, that will bring you to the year 1403, which from the Ramban was under 200 years away. Well, what happened? Time passed, 1403 came and went, and Rav Saadia Gaon and the Ramban, Mashiach did not come. So now we have up on the scene, in the 1400s, we have the Abarbanel writing in Spain, okay? So the Abarbanel is writing this towards the end of the 1400s, and he says, what is the time period we're looking at? The Edom, this time, is the time of the first Beis HaMikdash time period. Okay, that was one of the times which Rav Saadia Gaon took as well. He says that's the time. The time is 410 years. And again, like the Ramban, he says it's 410, it's that time, times 3.5. So what's 410 times 3.5? Equals, I put it on the sheet, 1,435 years. 1,435 years. From when? From the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. So if you go from the destruction of Beis HaMikdash, 1435, you end up with the year 1503. 100 years off from Rav Saadia Gaon. Meaning, yeah.
It's fascinating. Everybody, even the Rambam at the bottom here, are all picking time that we're ready in time of Daniel. Well, if it's a nevuah, the time could be. Why can't they? How do they know the time is a time that's already happened versus a time that hasn't even?
No, but it hasn't happened
yet. Why? Daniel
was in time of Bavel.
I understand. No, it happened. I'm saying, but instead of how do they know that this time, as they're talking about, why does it have to be a time that already happened? This time could be a time period which is a future event because it's nevuah. So it may not even be a time that already at this time and.
Thank you. Good. Oh, excellent. Good. Ari's asking a good question. Good. Okay. So what Ari's asking is, everyone is assuming that this X, the variable, this time that we're dealing with is a time period which this code word time is a period of time which has already occurred during the life of Daniel. Why are they assuming that? Maybe it's some other time period. Maybe it's a time period that we were out of Israel till 1948. I don't know. Who knows? So I think that I saw in some of the Mefarshim, I think the idea is they're saying is that they're assuming that because the assumption is that Daniel did understand when this was. So therefore, if Daniel understands what this code is, it must be a time period that he's familiar with. That's their assumption. It's not mukhrach, but that's what they're working with. But Ari's asking a good question. Like, who says, maybe not. Their assumption is, though, that he's working with a time period he's already familiar with. So,
Also, times could be,
right, correct.
doesn't have to be two.
Correct.
Times and half time, times.
Very good. Time is clear. The time and the half of time is clear. Times is very vague, right? Which they're assuming, again, the minimum of that, we said we have a concept, right? Miut of plural is two, but like Ari's saying, right, that it's very vague. That in of itself is not so clear. That is one thing they're all assuming is that it's two, but that part is not clear. You're right. So that Barbanel comes up with the year 1503, right? Meaning he's got the same calculation as Rav Sadia Gaon. We're counting from the destruction of Beis Hamikdash, but he doesn't work the way the times and time. He works the same way as the Ramban. It's whatever time period you have times 3.5. Then we come to the Malbim. The Malbim lives in Europe in the 1800s. So 1403 has gone by. He knows the Rav Sadia Gaon, he knows the Ramban, he knows the Barbanel. And he says, no Mashiach. So the Malbim says, again, the Barbanel was correct. The time was 410 years of the Bayis Rishon. But he says like this. He says, the way he views it is, he says, a time and times, so you take that time period of 410 and you multiply by 3. Okay? 410 times 3 is 1230. What's half a time? It's not half of that time, it's half of your total after you've multiplied by 3. So 1230 plus half is what? Is 615. 1230 plus 615 is 1845 years. 1845 years from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash is the year 1913, which again, from the Malbim, was like under 100 years away. Now the Malbim actually says another calculation, which I'm not going to get into. He actually says it starts in 1868. And then he disproves it. He says, no, it's really 19, I'm going with 1913. It's sure 1913. Then he says, what's going to happen is it's going to start in 1868. The Geula is going to begin, and Mashiach himself is going to come walk on the scene in 1913. So 1868 to 1913, that's our thing, but 1913 will be here for sure. The last thing I want to read for you is a quote from the Rambam. So the Rambam writes this letter. It's out of order and time-wise, but I put it on the bottom because he's different. The Rambam is writing a letter to, it's called the Igeres Teman. He writes a letter to this community, to the Jews of Yemen, who were, they were suffering religious persecution. They were persecuted big time and in addition to persecution, there was some guy who popped up who claimed like he was Mashiach, and half the people believed him, and then the people felt so bad that they believed him, so they wrote the Rambam, what did we do? Never, we were duped, and fine. So the Rambam writes this whole letter to him, and the Rambam says the following thing. He says, forget this whole Mashiach, stop calculating when Mashiach is. Chazal said it's bad, don't do it, don't calculate when Mashiach is. He says, but Rav Sadia Gaon already calculated it. Rav Sadia Gaon preceded the Rambam by 200 years. So the Rambam said, how could Rav Sadia Gaon have calculated when the Mashiach was? So he says the same thing. He says, because the people were in such a poor, destitute situation that he had to. They were going to go bonkers if he didn't, and they were going to give up hope. So he said, this is going to save everyone if I figure out when Mashiach is coming. So the Rambam says, but if you ask me, don't do it. Forget it. We're not going to calculate when Mashiach is coming. Okay. Then he says the following thing, right? Now he says, hold on a second. He says like this. The precise date of Mashiach cannot be known. However, the Rambam says, I am in possession of an extraordinary Masorah that I received from my own father, who got it from his father, going all the way back to our ancestors who were exiled from Yerushalayim and were mentioned by the Navi and Sefer Ovadia that the exiles of Yerushalayim went to Spain, and that's my great-great-great-great-grandfather. And according to this tradition, we have an implication of when Mashiach is going to come from the prediction of Bilam. So he doesn't go with the whole Daniel thing. The Rambam says, you people stop worrying about the whole Mashiach thing, and Rav Sadia Gaon did it, and he did it because he had to do it, but we're not, but you really shouldn't be doing that. But if you want to know, I really do have the secret, he says. And then what does he do? So he calculates it, and he explains it based on Pesukim in Sefer Bamidbar by Parshas Bilam. It's Perek Chav Gimel, Pasuk Chav Gimel. Easy to remember. 23. There's a pasuk there. It says, after a lapse of time, someone will tell Yisrael what God wanted. After a lapse of time, someone will tell Yisrael what God wanted. The Rambam says this is not an allusion to Mashiach coming, but it's an allusion to the return of Nevuah. After some lapse of time, there's a lapse, and after that time, this one will get up and will tell Klal Yisrael what God has wanted. So how do we figure out when that is? So he says, well, the lapse of time again has to be something. The return of Nevuah. He says it. He says return of Nevuah. Doesn't necessarily mean Mashiach. He said return of Nevuah, which presumably then Mashiach is shortly after. But okay. So how does he come up with this? He says, well, when is Bilam talking? Bilam is talking in the 38th year of the Midbar. So from the beginning of the world until the 38th year of the Midbar, when is that? Well, Yetzias Mitzrayim happened in the year 2448. So 2448 plus 32, 2448 plus 38 equals 24, it's really 86. I wrote 2045, it's only 2486. Right? 2448 plus 38 years brings you to 2486. So he says, after a lapse of time, so from the beginning of Mashiach to when Bilam was, the beginning of the world, so when Bilam was talking, was 2,486 years. So if you multiply that, he says, after a lapse of time, after this lapse of time that has occurred from the beginning of the world until now, I, Bilam, am talking, when this repeats itself from now until another 2,486 years, then it's going to be someone who's going to come tell the Jews what God wanted. And that's the return of Nevuah. So the Rambam says, I made a mistake. I wrote 2485 times 2 is 2486 times 2. So I'm off by 2 years. Brings you to the year 4,970, which is English year 1210 or 1212. Okay, which again was, it turned out to be 5-6 years after the Rambam died. But when he was writing this, within 100 years, and 1210 came, and it doesn't seem to be that Nevuah has returned. So these are the different explanations given. Rashi does say, we're going to see next week. Rashi says that people are giving different explanations, and if the time passes and Mashiach hasn't come based on one of these things, we see in retrospect that those things are just flat out wrong. They're mistakes. And then go back to the drawing board and try to figure out yourself and try to figure out another time. That's what Rashi says. We're going to see Rashi next week. There's another approach on the first page of the Mar Makomas here. It's from the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon famously says, this is a book, Eben Shlema, which is a Musar Sefer from the Vilna Gaon's collective writings. He says one line here. It's like one of the last chapters of Eben Shlema. He says, each generation there are possible final dates for the exile. These depend on the teshuva and merits unique to that generation. And some people say that the dates given by the Mefarshim here are potential dates, meaning it means all things being equal, these are the dates, right? The doctor tells you, eat healthy and exercise, and you'll live a long life. And unfortunately, people dropping dead at the age of 40, and then you have another person who's completely doesn't take care of their health, and they're living till 90. So what's going on? The answer is, well, all things being equal, everything else, eat well and exercise, and you'll live a long life. But there are other mitigating factors that can change that, right? And yes, not being healthy can end your life early, but there are other factors that can offset that. And here's the person who's living unhealthily and they're living till the late 90s. So the Vilna Gaon's similar concept is that he seems to be saying that there are possible dates for the Mashiach to come. He doesn't say this explicitly, but some people use this and say that the dates offered maybe fit into this category of the possible potential dates for Mashiach. And there are other factors that can offset that, and perhaps those things were offset, and perhaps it would have maybe come in 1403, like Rav Sadia Gaon, or 1503, like the Barbanel, or 1913, like the Malbim, or 1210, like the Rambam. But perhaps they're offset. Or you go with Rashi's approach, which is that they gave it their best attempt, and it came and passed, and therefore it's incorrect. And we'll go try and find something else. So, yeah, that what? Achak lo b'chol yom she'elo.
Days any different? Meaning.
Good. So that's a question in general, right? How do we deal with that, right? Meaning when we have a date, or the Gemara gives us, it says,
the way you understand that is with the merit, it can count the day. If I merit,
Right.
it can count the day. So then no day is really different. So how does it work with the whole Daniel's thing?
Right. So
So
there.
if Daniel is like an end date, like this one has to come by, that which it can't be the way. At least that. Or you could simply learn that's how it means, and they were just wrong.
So right. So it could mean more.
If Daniel is saying, so when Daniel himself, he can say it's not a kasha, because he's saying a date when it has to come. Like
Correct.
it can come early.
Right, but it's got to come by this time.
But how does it fit with the Vilna Gaon's explanation?
So
some days are more mitzvah.
Yeah, so I think with the Vilna Gaon's explanation, I think what you would say is, you would say, meaning, it could come any day. It could happen any day, but there are some dates which are more ripe for that to happen. Meaning, I can plant a garden whenever I want, but I'll be more successful in the spring than I will be in the winter. But I could plant in the winter if I want to if things were right. Okay. Yashikov, we'll see you next week for Perek Ches. Have a good Shabbos. Who lived past the prediction? Right, correct.
He must not have taken it.